I still remember the first letter. It arrived on a Tuesday in March, tucked between a credit card offer and my electric bill. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive-looking paper, and my address was written in this careful, deliberate handwriting that made me pause before opening it. Inside was a single page, and it started simply, "I saw you at the bookstore on Saturday." My heart did this weird flutter thing because I knew exactly which Saturday. I'd spent 3 hours at Morrison's Books downtown, lost in the poetry section, occasionally glancing up to watch the rain streak down the tall windows. I hadn't thought anyone was watching me back. The letter continued. "You picked up a collection by Ocean Vuong," read the first few pages standing there, and I watched your expression change. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't find the words. I'm better at writing them down. If you'd like to know who I am, leave a bookmark in your favorite poem and return to the store next Saturday at 2. If not, I understand. Sometimes mysteries are better left unsolved. It wasn't signed. No return address. Just those words and the faint smell of coffee that clung to the paper. I'm Elliot, by the way, 28 years old, working as a graphic designer from my apartment in the city, living a life that felt comfortable but increasingly hollow. I'd been single for 2 years after a relationship that ended not with a bang, but with a slow, painful realization that we'd become strangers sharing the same space. Since then, I'd buried myself in work, books, and the kind of routine that feels safe but never quite satisfying. That letter changed everything. I must have read it 50 times that week. I analyzed every word, every curve of the handwriting. It was distinctly masculine, confident but not aggressive. The paper quality suggested someone who cared about details, about making an impression. And the fact that he'd somehow found my address. That should have been creepy, but instead, it felt like the opening line of something I'd been waiting for without knowing it. Saturday came, and I was there at 1:45, bookmark carefully placed in a poem about longing and distance. I'd chosen Vuong's "Someday I'll Love Ocean Vuong" because it felt right. All that aching vulnerability about being seen and known. I waited. 2 o'clock passed. Then 2:15. I started to feel foolish, standing there with the book, glancing at every man who entered the poetry section. By 2:30, I'd convinced myself it was a prank or that I'd misunderstood somehow. I put the book back on the shelf and left, feeling more disappointed than I wanted to admit. The second letter arrived the following Tuesday. "I was there," it said. "I stood 3 shelves away and watched you place that bookmark. I read the poem later, bought my own copy. You have good taste. But when I tried to approach you, I couldn't do it. I've spent my whole life being the confident one, the one who always knows what to say, and suddenly I was paralyzed. I'm not used to caring this much about making the right impression. Same time next week? I promise I'll try harder." This time, I was angry. Who plays games like this? Who makes someone wait and hope and then doesn't show up? But underneath the anger was something else, curiosity. And maybe the first stirrings of understanding. This person, whoever he was scared, really scared. And somehow that made him more real to me. I didn't go back the next Saturday. I told myself I was done with the mystery, that I had better things to do than chase after someone who couldn't even face me. But I kept the letters. I put them in my desk drawer and found myself rereading them when I should have been working. The third letter arrived right on schedule. "You didn't come. I don't blame you. I wouldn't trust me either. But I need you to understand something. I'm not playing games. I'm terrified. I spent 32 years building a life that looks perfect from the outside. Successful career, nice apartment, friends who think they know me. But they don't, not really. I've never told anyone the truth about who I am, what I want. And then I saw you in that bookstore, completely unself-conscious, lost in poetry, and I felt something crack open inside me. You looked free in a way I've never been. I'm not ready to meet you face to face yet, but I'm not ready to let you go either. Can we do this for a while? Can I write to you?" His name was Dashiell. He signed that letter finally. Just his first name, but it felt like a gift. I wrote back. I didn't know his address, so I did the only thing I could think of. I went back to Morrison's Books and left a letter tucked inside the Vuong collection, same spot where I'd left the bookmark. In it, I told him yes. Yes, we could write. Yes, I wanted to understand. And yes, I was scared too, in my own way. That's how it started. Every Tuesday, like clockwork, a letter from Dashiell would arrive. And every Thursday, I'd leave my response at the bookstore, trusting that somehow he'd find it. It was the most analog, old-fashioned romance possible in the middle of our digital world, and it was perfect. His letters were beautiful. He wrote about his childhood in Vermont, the son of academics who had very specific ideas about who he should become. He wrote about law school, about building a career in corporate law that paid well but left him feeling empty. He wrote about the small moments of beauty that kept him going, the way morning light hit his kitchen counter, the elderly couple who walked past his building every evening holding hands, the satisfaction of a perfectly brewed cup of coffee. And slowly, carefully, he wrote about realizing he was gay. Not in a sudden revelation kind of way, but in the gradual, painful acknowledgement that he'd been lying to himself for decades. He'd dated women in college, even been engaged once, always feeling like he was performing a role rather than living a life. It wasn't until his early 30s that he'd finally admitted the truth to himself. And even then, he hadn't told another soul. "You're the first person who knows," he wrote in his 7th letter. "Even writing that down feels dangerous and liberating at the same time." I told him about my own journey, how I'd known since I was 14 but had been lucky enough to have parents who loved me regardless, how coming out had been difficult but ultimately freeing, how my ex-boyfriend Marcus and I had built something good for a while before it fell apart, not because of anything dramatic, but because we'd grown into different people. "Sometimes I wonder if I used up my chance at love," I wrote. "Like, maybe you only get one shot at finding someone who really gets you, and I already had mine." His response came faster than usual, arriving on a Friday instead of Tuesday. "Don't believe that. Love isn't a limited resource. It's not a game where you only get one turn. Every ending makes space for a new beginning. I have to believe that, Elliot. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this?" We wrote for 3 months. Spring turned to summer, and I found myself living for Tuesdays. I'd wake up early, check the mail before I'd even had coffee, and spend the rest of the day absorbed in whatever Dashiell had sent. His handwriting became as familiar as my own. I could tell his moods by the slant of his letters, the pressure of his pen on the page. He sent me poems he'd written, terrible and earnest and heartbreaking. He sent me photographs of his neighborhood, always carefully angled so I couldn't identify exactly where he lived. He sent me a pressed flower from his morning walk, a receipt from a coffee shop with a note on the back about how the barista had smiled at him, and he'd wondered if this was what it felt like to be seen. I sent him sketches, little illustrations of the things he described. I sent him playlists transcribed onto paper, track listings of songs that reminded me of his letters. I sent him my own vulnerabilities, my fear that I was wasting my life on work that didn't matter, my loneliness, my hope that somewhere out there was a person who could know all of me and stay. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he wrote in mid-June. "Is that possible? To love someone you've never spoken to? Someone whose voice you've never heard? I lie awake at night imagining conversations we might have. I see something funny during my day and think about how I'll describe it to you. You've become the person I'm always talking to in my head." I cried when I read that letter, sat on my kitchen floor with tears running down my face because I felt exactly the same way and hadn't been brave enough to say it first. "Yes," I wrote back. "It's possible. I know because I'm falling too." That's when everything got complicated. In July, my landlord informed me that my building was being sold and converted to condos. I had 60 days to either buy my unit, which I absolutely couldn't afford, or find a new place. I was devastated. I loved that apartment. More than that, it was where Dashiell sent his letters. It was our connection point, the address that linked us. I told him immediately, my handwriting shaky with anxiety. "I have to move. I don't know what this means for us." His response arrived the next day, overnight delivery instead of regular mail. "It doesn't mean anything. Keep sending me your letters. I'll keep sending mine to your address. Even after you leave, I'll keep sending them there. Eventually you'll come back for them, or maybe you won't, and they'll pile up like evidence of something that almost happened. But I won't stop, Elliot. I can't. It was romantic and completely impractical, and it should have been a red flag. But instead, it felt like a promise. I moved in August to a smaller place across town, cheaper, but nothing special. I left a forwarding address with the post office. Yeah, but I knew that wouldn't help with Dashiell's letters since he never put a return address. I gave the new building manager a heads up that I might have mail arriving at my old address and asked if there was any way to retrieve it. She looked at me like I was insane. Why don't you just tell your friend your new address? How could I explain that I didn't know how to reach him, that our entire relationship existed in the space between mailboxes and bookstore shelves, that asking for more felt like it might break whatever fragile magic we'd created? The first Tuesday in my new apartment, no letter came. I'd expected that, but it still hurt. I imagined my cream-colored envelope sitting in the mailbox of my old building, waiting for a version of me who no longer lived there. On Thursday, I drove across town. My old building's mailboxes were in the lobby, accessible without a key. I checked my old box and found it. Dashiell's letter, right on schedule. I stood there in the lobby of a building where I no longer belonged, reading words meant for a version of my life that had already ended. I'm writing to a ghost, his letter said. You're gone from this address, but I'm sending this anyway because I don't know what else to do. I'm not brave enough to ask for your new address because that feels too real, too much like admitting that this has to change. Can we exist in this liminal space for a while longer? Can I keep writing to the place where you used to be? Every Tuesday for the next month, I made the drive, 20 minutes each way to collect a letter from a mailbox I no longer had any right to access. The new tenant, a college student named Amy, caught me once. I expected her to call the cops or at least tell me off, but instead, she listened to my stumbling explanation and just nodded. That's actually really romantic, she said. I'll keep an eye out on Tuesdays. If I see anything, I'll text you. She made me give her my number, and true to her word, she'd send me a message. Letters here. Dashiell's letters during this period were different, more introspective, more urgent. He wrote about how the physical distance between us, now that I'd moved, made everything feel more real and more impossible at the same time. He wrote about almost calling the bookstore to ask about me, about standing outside Morrison's for an hour, trying to work up the courage to go in and ask if anyone knew Elliot, who left letters in the poetry section. I think I need to meet you, he wrote in September. Not because the letters aren't enough, they're everything, but because I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of hiding. You've given me this gift of being honest, of being seen, even if it's only on paper. I want more. I want to hear your voice. I want to see your face when you laugh. I want to know if the reality of you matches the version I've built in my head, and I want you to know the real me too, not just the carefully curated person in these letters. My hands were shaking when I wrote back. Yes, please, I'm ready whenever you are. His next letter gave me a date and time. October 15th, 2 p.m, Morrison's Books, the poetry section, where it all started. I was terrified. What if he was disappointed? What if I was? What if the magic that existed in our letters evaporated the moment we tried to translate it into the real world? I'd fallen in love with his mind, his words, his vulnerability, but I didn't know what he looked like, how he moved through space, whether his physical presence would match the intimacy we'd built. The week before our meeting, I didn't receive a letter. Tuesday came and went with nothing in my old mailbox. I told myself he was just nervous, that he was waiting until we met in person. But by Thursday, I was panicking. I left 3 letters at the bookstore, each one more desperate than the last. Had he changed his mind? Had I pushed too hard? On October 14th, the day before we were supposed to meet, a letter arrived at my new address. Somehow he'd found it. I'm sorry, it said. I've been silent because I've been warring with myself. I want to meet you more than I've wanted anything in years, but I'm also terrified that I'll ruin this. You've become the best part of my life, Elliot. These letters, this connection, it's the only place where I'm completely honest, completely myself. What if meeting in person destroys that? What if I freeze up like I did that first day? What if you see me and realize I'm just another scared, closeted man who can't give you what you deserve? He continued, but I'm coming tomorrow anyway, because you deserve someone who's brave enough to try, because I'm tired of living in fear, because maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of something real. I'll be there at 2. I'll be wearing a blue jacket and holding a copy of Ocean Vuong. I hope you still want to meet the man behind the letters. I didn't sleep that night. I changed outfits 6 times the next morning. I arrived at Morrison's at 1:30 and spent 25 minutes in my car, trying to calm my breathing. This was it. Months of letters, of falling in love with words and vulnerability and the idea of someone, all coming down to this moment. I walked into the bookstore at exactly 2 o'clock. The poetry section was in the back corner, the same place where this had all started 6 months ago. And there he was. Dashiell was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair starting to gray at the temples. The blue jacket he'd mentioned was well-tailored, professional. He stood with his back partially to me, shoulders tense, holding the Vuong collection like a shield. Everything about his posture screamed anxiety and hope in equal measure. I must have made a sound because he turned. Our eyes met, and I watched recognition and fear and something like wonder cross his face. He was handsome in an understated way, with kind eyes and smile lines that suggested he didn't smile often enough. He was older than me by a few years, exactly as he'd described, but somehow more real than any image I'd constructed. Elliot? His voice was softer than I'd imagined, uncertain. Dashiell. Saying his name out loud for the first time felt monumental. We stood there, 3 feet apart, neither of us knowing how to bridge the gap between the intimacy of our letters and the awkwardness of our bodies in space. Then he did something that broke the tension. He laughed, this nervous. A genuine sound that made him suddenly human and accessible. I've imagined this moment 1,000 times, he said, and I never once pictured us both looking this terrified. I laughed too, felt something relax in my chest. I think I need coffee. Do you want to get coffee? We ended up at a cafe 2 blocks away, sitting across from each other with cups we barely touched, talking like we'd known each other forever and like we were strangers all at once. He told me about his job, about the cases he worked on that drained him. I told him about my design work, about the clients who wanted everything to be more dynamic without knowing what that meant. But mostly, we talked about the letters, about how strange and wonderful it was to finally put voices to the words we'd shared, and about how he'd found my new address by asking at the bookstore, where the owner remembered me and had my information from a special order I'd placed months ago. I almost didn't come today, he admitted. I sat in my apartment this morning and convinced myself 10 different times that I should cancel, that I should just keep things the way they were. But then I thought about something you wrote, about how love isn't a limited resource, and I realized I was treating my courage the same way, like I only had so much of it and I had to hoard it. But maybe courage is like love. Maybe the more you use it, the more you have. I reached across the table and took his hand. He flinched slightly, glanced around the cafe with an ingrained nervousness, but he didn't pull away. I'm really glad you came, I said. We talked until the cafe closed. Then we walked around the neighborhood, still talking, discovering that the connection we'd built through letters translated perfectly into the physical world. He was funny in person, with a dry wit that hadn't fully come through in his writing. He had this habit of touching his temple when he was thinking, of looking away when he said something vulnerable. It was fully dark when we finally stopped walking, finding ourselves in a small park near the river. We sat on a bench, close enough that our shoulders touched. I need to tell you something, Dashiell said, his voice serious. I'm not out, at all. My family doesn't know. My coworkers don't know. I've built this entire life predicated on people not knowing who I really am. If we do this, if we try to build something real, it's going to be complicated. I can't promise you easy. I thought about that, about what it meant to love someone who was still finding the courage to live authentically, about whether I could be patient with someone's journey when I'd already walked that path myself years ago. I don't need easy, I said finally. I need honest. I need someone who's trying, even if they're scared. You've been writing letters to my old address for 2 months, Dashiell. That's not the action of someone who isn't trying. He turned to look at me, and in the streetlight, I could see tears in his eyes. I kept writing because I couldn't let you go. Even when it was impractical and probably a little crazy, I couldn't stop. You're the first person who's ever made me want to be brave. I kissed him then. Gentle, tentative, a question more than a statement. He kissed me back. And it felt like every letter we'd ever written, every word of vulnerability and hope, crystallized into that single moment. That was 8 months ago. It hasn't been easy. Dashiell is still navigating what it means to come out, to live openly. He told his sister first, and she cried and told him she'd known for years and was just waiting for him to be ready. He started therapy, working through decades of internalized shame and fear. He's not ready for grand public gestures, but he's trying. He holds my hand when we're in certain neighborhoods. He introduces me as his boyfriend to new people, even though I can see the effort it costs him. And me? I'm learning patience. I'm learning that love isn't just about the grand romantic gestures, but about showing up consistently, about creating space for someone to grow at their own pace. Some days are harder than others. There are moments when I wish he was further along in his journey, when his hesitation feels like rejection, even though I know it's not about me. But then I remember the letters. I have them all, stored in a box in my closet. Sometimes I take them out and reread them, remembering the man who was brave enough to write his truth, even when he couldn't speak it. That man is still in there, still growing, still learning to take up space in the world. Last week, something happened that felt significant. We were at Morrison's Books together, browsing the poetry section where we'd technically first met. Dashiell picked up a new collection and started reading it out loud to me, unself-conscious, his voice carrying in the quiet store. An elderly woman walked past and smiled at us, this knowing, a warm smile that said she recognized what we were. Instead of tensing up or moving away, Dashiell smiled back. Then he reached over and took my hand, right there in public, in the place where our story began. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for waiting for me, for giving me the space to figure this out." "Thank you for the letters," I replied, "for being brave enough to write them even when you couldn't say the words out loud." We still write to each other sometimes, not as frequently as before, since we see each other most days now, but occasionally I'll find a note tucked into my bag or a letter waiting on my pillow. And sometimes, just for the romance of it, Dashiell still addresses them to my old apartment. Amy, the college student who lives there now, has become our unlikely friend. She collects them and texts me. And I make the drive across town to pick them up, remembering how it all started. Because some things are worth preserving, even when they're impractical. Some connections are built on more than convenience or logic. They're built on vulnerability and courage and the willingness to reach out across the distance, to say, "I see you" to another person and mean it with everything you have. I saw Dashiell at a bookstore on a rainy Saturday. He saw me back. And somehow, through letters and patience and the slow, steady work of building trust, we found each other. We're still finding each other, really. Every day is a new discovery, a new letter in the ongoing story we're writing together. It's not the easiest love story, but it's ours, and it's real, and it's worth every moment of uncertainty and hope that brought us here.